Now we're ready.
Matt, do the 18th.
Ready to go?
It's on.
Okay. When Eric tells you.
Okay. Good. So we're going to call the meeting to order for September 18th, 2023. Roll call of the members.
So leaders,
Here.
Schultz.
Here.
Brett Larson.
Here.
Chapman.
Here.
And just 1 second, let's see if Dolores is
Okay.
on the phone. I didn't hear anybody.
You are now unmuted.
Dolores, are you on the phone? Not now, but we're good to keep going. I'll just mark it down.
So you've had a chance to read the minutes. Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
Make
Or
a motion. I'll second.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the same? Okay. All right, so read the statement. Starting at the top, Clark, here? Or just this?
Just right there.
Okay. The public hearings will be conducted pursuant to the Commission's rules of procedure. We will first hear the report of the Planning Director on the detailed information and observations regarding the request before the Commission, if not done so in written form prior to the hearing. Next, we will take the testimony of the applicant and his or her witnesses. Upon completion of the applicant's testimony, I will call upon members of the audience wishing to be heard concerning the request. Persons in favor of the request shall be heard first, followed by those who oppose to it. At any time during the presentation of testimony, the members of the Commission may interrupt to ask questions or to make comments on what has been said. Upon completion of all testimony, the applicant will be allowed to make a closing statement to the Commission. Upon completion of the applicant's closing statement, I will entertain a motion from the Commission to close the public hearing on the request. The Commission reserves the right to ask questions of any member of the audience. However, we will not hear any unsolicited statements unless the public hearing is first reopened. Each speaker addressing the Commission shall step forward to the podium and state their name and address before proceeding with their testimony or evidence. This Commission shall not be bound by strict rules of evidence, but does reserve the right to exclude evidence or testimony that it may deem to be irrelevant, immaterial, incompetent, or unduly repetitious. As chairman, I will make rules on all questions relating to the admissibility of evidence, which may be overruled by a majority of the Commission. Continuances may be granted by the Commission in case for good cause shown to any interested party who has entered their appearance. The Commission may request continuance of a hearing for the purpose of giving further notice, taking further evidence, gathering further information, touring the proposed site, or for such other reasons as the Commission may find sufficient. In such case, we shall state the specific reasons for the continuance and set a date, time, and place when the matter will be continued. All official actions of this Commission will be made at a public meeting by motion made, seconded, and polling of the membership. If conditions are imposed, such conditions shall be included in the motion or amendment thereto. Our final decision will be prepared in writing and will be part of the public record of this Commission. Upon reading that, I would ask for a motion to open up the public hearing on case number ZTA 202303.
I'll move that.
Second it.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the same. And then the applicant can come forward and state your name and address.
Yep.
So this case is brought to you from us, Pottawattamie County, for the zoning text amendment to Pottawattamie County zoning ordinance. It's Chapter 8, and it is for the adding the wind energy systems and the solar energy system to our ordinance. I made you all aware that the county had contracted with David Levy, he's here today with us, to update our wind section and then add in a solar section for us because we'd had some development potentials popping up on a commercial solar arrays as well. So tonight, we've provided you with the proposed revisions to the zoning ordinance, and I guess we'd like to kind of more so approach it as, you know, do we have any questions, anything that stands out that we want to review in particular on those? That'd be first.
Can we have, I'm sorry, Mr. Levy, is that the name?
Yes, thank you.
Could we have him maybe explain some of it to us, or, I mean, I don't know if anybody's got any questions, but that's what I would prefer, is if maybe somebody can go over it with us and fill us in on what
Sure.
what it entails.
Sure, we can do that. You want me to do that from here or come up? Podium? Here's okay?
I'm
Just
saying,
name
that's
and
okay,
address.
yeah.
Tell me.
Sure. David Levy, Barrett Home Law Firm, 1700 Farnham Street, Omaha, Nebraska, here on behalf of Pottawattamie County. As Matt said, our task here was to look at the existing wind ordinance and propose any updates to that, changes to that. We did not have a lot. There were a few things, and Matt will have to help me, but there were a few specific things I think that the county had wanted us to look at, if I remember correctly. And then, as Matt said, the solar ordinance is something that the county doesn't currently have. We did a similar project in Mills County late in 2022 and in the first part of 2023. We felt like that process ended with a good solar ordinance, and when I say good, it's in my view, it's not a matter of my opinion as pro-solar, anti-solar, whatever it is. Our goal in this, what I think this is all about, is you're trying to balance the rights of the people who want to participate in a project and the people who either don't want to participate in it or are going to live next to it, right? You're trying to, everybody's got property rights, and zoning imposes on people's property rights, and so I think we and you all have the job. It's not an art nor a science, just a challenge to find that sort of balance between participants, non-participants, the broader community. I think the Mills County process for solar ended up getting close to that balance, and I think they had some innovative things for looking at environmental impacts and impacts to soil and agricultural areas and things like that. And so that candidly is what we started from for Pottawattamie County as well. Without going through all the details, and I certainly can, but kind of in the vein of an overview, you know, I think the things that are important in these ordinances, one, of course, is setbacks, right? Again, especially to non-participating residences, first and foremost. In some cases, you also deal with setbacks to property lines, but especially in an agricultural area, property lines are important, and they certainly show up on a map, but an impact to a property line is a little bit hard to judge. An impact to somebody's residence where they're living and sleeping is, especially for a non-participant, is I think where the focus is most important when it comes to setbacks. And so both ordinances deal with that, wind and solar. Like I mentioned, there are things about environmental protection, protection of soil, especially for solar. What needs to be in an application, what the Planning Commission and ultimately the Board of Supervisors should have before it when it's making a decision on a project. Decommissioning is a big part of this. What happens when the project reaches the end of its useful life? The thought is, and I think in most cases it will be, that the owner of that project will be there and will remove that project. But there's always a concern, what if they're not? These are big projects. They occupy a lot of land. And so you want to make sure that the county and the taxpayers of the county are protected financially, and that there are plans and ultimately funds to decommission and remove a project at the end of its useful life. If the owner of the project should not be there to do that. Impacts to county roads, especially with wind projects, it's big equipment. It will impact county roads coming and going, especially during construction, but also during maintenance, and that's another thing that you want to make sure is covered in your ordinance, and I think it is covered in these drafts as well. With wind, sound, also wind turbines do make noise.
that sound like anything attenuates with distance. It's another type of a setback in essence, and so, that is dealt with as well. Things like shadow flicker, the lights on top of the wind turbines, fencing around a solar project, some of the different things like that that get a little bit more into the details, if you will. So that's what these ordinances cover. Again, in my view, having done this in a lot of places for a lot of years, representing both developers of these facilities and counties, municipalities, I think both of these ordinances do a good job of finding that balance, of allowing people who want to put their land to that legal land use and protecting and respecting the property rights of the people who don't like it or have to live near it, or whatever the case might be. Again, trying to balance those property rights of participants and non-participants, and protecting the community. So I know that was kind of general,
No, that's
but
kind of what I was after.
okay,
You worked with Mills County then, how, and that's recently?
yes,
How has that, have they passed this ordinance then,
They
is that
did.
correct?
they
And
did.
how long ago?
Their board of supervisors passed it in May,
Okay, so it's
mid-May,
real
so it's
recent.
about, what's that, 4 months ago?
Okay.
Yeah.
Have you worked with any other counties in the general area?
We're working with Adams County also currently, so we'll be in Clarinda tomorrow night doing the same thing.
Okay.
Um,
Are there any counties where you've worked and put in place this type of ordinance that's been in place for a while? That's local to us?
There are, most of those have been in Nebraska, but, state to state doesn't matter a whole lot. Fundamentally, these are big land use projects and their impacts to land and to property, and these ordinances, as I've mentioned a few times, I think they get pretty close to finding that balance, or what I think that balance is. They also are very, what would I call it? They're pretty common to many of the places that we work. They're not one extreme or the other. Every ordinance in every county is going to be different in some way.
Right.
But, for example, the 300-foot setback from a non-participating residence in the solar ordinance, I wouldn't call that an industry standard, because I don't know that there is one, because every county is different again. But that's kind of right down the middle of what you see. You see some smaller and you see some a lot bigger.
Okay. So you've kind of tweaked, I'd say, what you put together from your past experience with maybe issues that you had or
That's right.
information you found out from
That's
other
right.
counties?
We've been working in the utility scale wind industry in the Midwest for about 20 years, over 15 years. Solar at the utility scale is newer, and so that's been more like 7 or 8 years. But lots of projects across lots of counties and lots of communities. And not just Nebraska, Iowa, Kansas, Missouri, South Dakota, as well. Colorado.
A question, so, and maybe you don't know, maybe Matt, you know, but, are these, is this ordinance gonna be more restrictive than what we've allowed in the past for our county?
With respect to wind.
Right,
Correct. Yeah, it is more restrictive, but I don't think when you look at what's put in there, it's not anything that's outside of the norm of,
and what is our height requirement, like, do we have a max height?
currently we do not, no.
So setbacks then, I mean, I guess that's kind of my question is like, are we just gonna take care of it because we've set the setback from the furthest non-participating person 3 times away from the height of the highest windmill that they're putting up? Is that how we're accomplishing that, or?
Imagine, are there any kind of FHA rules or
FAA.
FAA, sorry,
Yeah.
real estate guy.
They do. Yes, the FAA does come into play in those permits before they go to get granted, as well as review from the sheriff's office. I think this helps us tighten things up. 2007, when the initial wind farm came to Pottawattamie County, they did, you know, we had wind regulations, we got them put into place, but there were things that were missed. The damage to the roads was
Yeah.
extreme. And we didn't have any way to come back after that. But then we learned that lesson, right? So then when it came time for the repowering of that wind farm that was up there, we made sure that we communicated those concerns, road surveys were done, and then, things were made right at the end. But it's nothing that was written into our ordinance to make sure that it happens. This has it written into the ordinance to make sure that we have a road mitigation plan in place. The roads get surveyed ahead of time, they get surveyed after the project, to make sure that that they're brought back up to the standard that they need to be. I think the report, laid out really well for us, the zoning districts that are affected by each. You know, when you look at the solar ordinance, at the top of that page, it says zoning districts. It's, would be conditional uses in the following zoning districts, which is A2, A3, R1, C1, C2, C3, I1, and I2 districts. And so then that brings everybody then before the zoning board of adjustment, prior to permits being issued. So they get their conditional use permit, and then they would be allowed to submit then for their building permit from our office to make sure that happens. So then that would allow us to make sure that we have, that was kind of one of the things as I read through it, it is gonna require a lot more from our office just to make sure that we have all of those plans submitted, reviewed, and then we maintain those plans. And that's, you know, from your agricultural impact plan, soil erosion, we've already added the soil erosion piece into our building permits. So that wasn't gonna be too much for us. We'll add in the vegetation mitigation plan on there. This will be one of the first times that we, you know, actually go back through and manage a landscape buffer for the rural setting. So that's gonna be new to us, but I think our soil erosion, when we made the changes in chapter 10 and added in the grading and excavation ordinance, that already has prepared the staff for that and has training in there. We do want to make sure that we, you know, I had brought up originally, I think when I talked to David about this was, you know, we have a lot of the solar piece that people are looking at kind of falls within a JLUS study. And that JLUS study was done to make sure that we don't ever impede upon Offutt's flight paths that they have. Well, that one little corner of our county is kind of right in that area of that, and that seems to be where all of the every solar development that we've had talking to us so far is right in that one little corner of where that would fall. So I wanted to make sure that we are staying true to not impacting Offutt on there. I think that you know helps us add in there that piece of it. Stormwater management, again, we have that already geared up and ready to go through our building permit process, and staff's been trained on it. The decommissioning plan and reclamation plan, that is a part that we really probably are lacking in our ordinances right now. So, you know, I know Mid-American Energy's here, and they're the ones that have the wind farm right now. God forbid anything were to ever happen to Mid-American Energy were to go away or change, and we're left with a wind farm up there. That would be the one that does not have a decommissioning plan to it. Now, when decommissioning plans are not something it's not something that's new to Pottawattamie County, because when cell towers originally kicked off, decommissioning plans were a part of the cell tower permitting process. So decommissioning plans aren't anything new. I don't think this definitely shouldn't be anything new to the industry before, but it does add another layer of protection for the county to say, hey, if something were to happen, then we could potentially at least have a plan in place for that part of it.
Where'd you guys get 6 feet? For the 6 feet on the decommissioning below the surface? How did we come to that figure? And I guess I'm just curious the science behind that.
The thinking there is, again, you're always trying to balance, I think. And the thinking in a lot of counties, it's actually 4 feet, but the idea is that you need to remove what's close enough to the surface that it would affect the future use of the land, assuming that it's gonna be used for agriculture. And my understanding of farming techniques in this part of the country is you don't typically do anything, tilling the dirt or anything that goes down more than 4 feet. 6 feet is quite frankly on the high end or the deep end, if you will. And Commissioner Schultz, just to go back, you were asking about height also.
Yep.
One thing I wanted to address, there are two things, and you asked about the FAA. The setback that's in here for wind is 3 times the turbine height. And I'm a big fan of those setbacks that are multiples of the turbine heights, because over time, turbines have gotten taller. The technology, as I understand it, for the towers is such that that's going to be limiting. You'd have to go to a concrete tower, is my understanding, if they got a lot taller. Blades have gotten longer as a way to capture more wind and make them more efficient. And so with that setback that's a multiple of the turbine height, it builds into your ordinance sort of an automatic ability to move with the technology. Somebody shows up with a 400-foot turbine and somebody else shows up with a 600-foot turbine, and you make them both set back 2,000 feet, you're not finding that balance, I think, or not as well. The FAA, anything over 200 feet tall or 200 feet or above, requires submission to and study by the FAA. And they study each tower, and ultimately before a developer can construct a tower, they have to receive for that tower what's called a determination of no hazard to air navigation. So that is another check on that. You guys were talking about Offutt with solar. Solar panels are made to reflect the sunlight, so there's not a lot of glare. The intent is to capture the sunlight, but that is a concern when they're near airports or aviation facilities. And so there's a requirement in the draft solar ordinance for a glare study.
What's the height of the the turbines that Mid-American has now? Approximately, you know?
I think they're around 330.
So 3 times the height
Just curious
for setback,
there, what they are.
so about 1,000 feet.
Correct.
More commonly today, what we see is turbines that are 575 feet to 650 feet tall, depends on the manufacturer and the model. But so you're talking about a setback typically that's in that range of 1,800 feet, 2,000 feet. That's 3/8 of a mile. That's a pretty good distance.
Is there anyone who wants to come forward and speak in favor of this? Anyone who is opposed would like to come forward? Okay.
First one up.
Address to you folks, is that what I do?
Yeah, if you could state your name and address, please.
My name is Jeff Jorgensen, I'm county supervisor. My address is 201 Shaley Circle, Council Bluffs, Iowa. I have a relative who was started as a technician for Mid-America Energy on wind generation, and he is not in favor of wind generation by any means. They have a lot of issues. For instance, subsidies. What happens when when subsidies quit? Are they decommissioned at that point? Because they're not feasible, financially feasible and sustainable, period. The fact that you've got a big old concrete block in the ground, and if you're going to decommission them, you lower that concrete surface 6 feet, still alters the underground characteristics in that area. So I have a lot of issues. They're visibly, to me anyway, they're just, I don't like looking on the horizon and seeing wind generation, generator after wind generator after wind generator. At night, all you see is red blinking lights, look like the sun coming up in the morning. They are a visible, whatever you want to call it, nuisance, in my opinion. And if they're not going to if they get decommissioned, they're not going to completely remove everything, including that big old concrete block in the ground, I am not for any of this at all, especially wind generation. Solar might be a different issue. I'd certainly have to take a look at it and talk to other people that are in that industry, but I've talked to enough people in the wind generation industry to know that it is not financially viable. We all pay for that. And when that subsidy stops, the federal government stops that subsidy, what happens then? They're going to be gone. So that's where I'm at on wind generation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I ask one more question?
Yeah.
Soil compaction, so you just have language here about just restoring the soil to, acceptable condition or something like that, but I guess, is there consideration for compaction standards or anything that we have to consider? Or is that just between the agreement with the wind energy company and the landowner? For decommissioning, I'm sorry.
Sure, no, you could handle that either way. You raise a good point, and it also goes to decommissioning. Most wind and solar leases that I've seen over many years of doing this have a decommissioning requirement in them already. You have county decommissioning requirements also in zoning because you don't want to leave it to the landowner to have to enforce that contract and all of that. But point really being that there are provisions in those leases for things like restoring soil and things like that. But if, it was the direction of the county to come up with something to put in your zoning ordinance that had an objective standard, I know that soil compaction is something that can be measured. And that's certainly something that you could do. I mean, none of this is set in stone. These are drafts for your consideration.
Sure. Yeah, I appreciate that. I think back to conversations I had, like when I was on the board with, there was a look at doing one in like Silver Creek or something like that corridor, and there were a lot of folks that were upset about, what's gonna happen on my farm after they put in the utilities to get there, the compaction of the soil, and there's a lot of promises I think that get made by wind companies, and I think that's I'm wondering if there's standards out there that maybe we ought to consider putting in here, just so that we can guarantee it, But I know, I'm no stranger to the pipeline stuff that's going on
Sure.
right now, and so, there's definitely compaction stuff there when there's decommissioning, and,
Yeah.
I just wanna make sure we're considering that.
Yeah. And there are crop damage provisions and things like that, I think,
Yeah, I
in
guess
every
it-
lease that I've looked at. I will say too, I've been to a lot of wind farms, and you can almost stand there and touch the base of the turbine and pick a soybean with your other arm, and I have short arms. So the crops really do grow almost right back up to the turbine. But
Yeah.
again, if that's something you wanted to direct us, work with Matt to come up with a more objective standard to that.
Well, some of it's,
Reasonable.
I guess there's that private level where it's kinda, the farmer's gotta make some of this agreement too. But when you drive east, you get out there by Adair and, just east of Cass County there, you start to see all those turbines that are out there, right? And you look at the corn, and then you can absolutely see where the utility went to that building, because the corn's not near as high, it might be, you're right, they're gonna farm every bit of that land they possibly can to get every bushel, but, what I fear is that, okay, so grandma and grandpa have the farm right now, and they agree to have the wind energy come in, put the turbines up, they end up passing, 10, 20 years down the road, pass this on to the kids take over the farm, and now they're left with a compaction issue that they can't really fix or remedy, and to your point, if they do go out of business, God forbid they ever do, it makes you wonder what happens next, so, I don't know, maybe some of you can address that.
The compaction part of it, I would say, we can definitely look into that part of it. But for us as a county to try and, with that being on there, it's gonna be, it's on there, they agreed to sign the lease, it's now on their private property part of it. For us to constantly be out there monitoring it to make sure that they got to some acceptable level, it would be tough.
The landowner needs to address that.
If they're willing to sign that lease,
So
then
burden's
Yeah.
on them.
it would.
Makes
because
sense?
What was, on our part of it, the enforcement side of things, right, the permitting side of things, we try to balance that to where is that permit gonna cover the cost of what the inspectors have to be out there looking at through that time period? And I wouldn't wanna try to even estimate, if we're gonna go return to the site for the next 5 years to make sure we hit those grade levels, or if they,
Well, you can't, yeah, I mean, I get it. The
You're probably
yields
gonna
are-
need 3 or
can't
4 new
measure.
employees, aren't
I
you?
mean, I just think, there's some kind of soil scientists out there, and, I mean, they're hard enough to get
Engineer.
perk tests done
Yeah.
for that part of it.
Did somebody else want to?
Hi, I'm Matthew Spaka-Panicha, 2332 Charming Fair Drive, Woodridge, Illinois. I'm the developer for RWE Clean Energy. I'm a wind, solar, and battery storage developer. I develop projects across the Midwest, and I want to say that I'm against certain portions of that that I want to get to, but I just wanted to see, can I provide just a quick update on our existing project, if you'd like to hear that?
Sounds good to me.
Okay, I'll try to be quick. So this project was kicked off in 2018. I'm recently assigned to it as of May for this year, so I'm still getting my feet wet, meeting with landowners. As of today, we have 94 leases signed, totaling 175 landowners. That is across 19,787 acres, with another 600 verbally committed just this week. And we anticipate 20,000 acres needed for the project, so we're right there. So far, we've paid out $1.5 million to landowners in development rent. Over the course of this project, we anticipate over 30 years, if this project goes into operations, paying out $25 million to the landowners, bringing in 200 to 300 construction jobs for roughly 8 to 10 months for the build, and then 6 to 10 jobs throughout the operations, with another $50 million of new taxable revenue for the county over 30 years as well.
This project is all in Pottawattamie County, so these numbers are all Pottawattamie County, is that
All
correct?
Pottawattamie. The
Okay.
project right now I have
600 people.
Minden, Pleasant, Norfolk, York, and James Township, so northeast
So
by
six-
Avoca.
So 600 landowners have agreed verbally.
175 landowners
Uh-huh.
across 94 acres, or 94 leases.
What was the 600?
Another 600 acres verbally
Oh,
committed
verbally.
this week to push us over that 20,000
Oh.
acre mark. Thank you, just wanted to give an update there. So I just want to briefly talk about the setbacks and then the decommissioning part and the reclamation plan, and then I'll turn it over to Ken to talk about sound. So with the setbacks, it's that 3 times the height from the closest exterior wall of an occupied, non-participating dwelling. A lot of heights that I'm seeing in other counties around here are more towards that 1.1 to 2.1. Like Cass County is 1,200, Boone County is 1,250, Carroll County 1,000, Greene County 1,000, Ida County 1,250. I'm wanted to see if the board would consider changing the language to something along the lines of a turbine shall not be located less than the greater distance of 1,250 feet or 2.5 times the total height of a turbine from the closest exterior wall of any occupied non-participating dwelling. And then the second one was the decommissioning with that 6 foot that's in the proposed language. I wanted to see if the board can consider modifying that down to 5 feet below the surface. A lot of ordinances around the state is anywhere from 48 inches to 60 inches. I'm not finding any that are 6 feet. So I guess that was a question someone asked earlier, why 6 feet? So
You have different soil.
so that was my question. So, but yeah, those are the 2 items I just wanted to bring up for consideration of modifying.
So the bases of these things, the concrete, how
How
deep
deep?
are they normally?
10 to 12,
10 to
depending on the
12.
model. Yep.
And it's concrete base, so so if they were gonna decommission them, they'd basically
Blow it up.
break out 6 foot or however many feet and the rest stays there.
Correct.
Okay, gotcha. What's a typical size of a base?
Size of a base, 12 feet deep, 90 feet tapered
Wow,
off to the sides,
90 feet?
90 feet.
Oh, that's big.
And there's a lot of
Crater?
rebar. I mean, they're massive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
90 feet.
I knew they were big, I just
No, good questions.
didn't know for sure. It's gotta be big, cause it,
Hold it up.
it's a long ways up there, a lot of pressure. Okay, so why 1250?
1250, it provides a little bit more buildable area because you have to take all the considerations of the setbacks from the public right-of-way, from the transmission lines, comm towers. It's just eating away at say 200 to 300 feet of buildable area from landowners that did sign up onto the project. And yeah, those 200 to 300 feet may make someone get a turbine, may not, and that could be hundreds of $1,000 differences in compensation over the lifetime of the project.
Typically, what's it per month or per year, per wind turbine?
For
Per turbine?
give or take, a third of an acre to a half an acre, and most of that's because of the access road. The actual turbine is set on a 12-foot in diameter, like your average cinder block silo. You're looking at all-in compensation close to $22,000 for that third to a half an acre
And that's per year?
per year.
And does it increase over time?
It does.
Is there a set percentage or it's all?
This one
I'm
has a
assuming it does.
royalty, yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
I was just telling her.
My name is Ken Koliski. I am a principal with RSG, 55 Railroad Row, White River Junction, Vermont, and Kaliski. Cards you have back. So I'm a professional engineer, board certified through the Institute of Noise Control Engineering, or INS, and within INS, I'm the co-chair of the Wind Turbine Noise Technical Activity Committee, also former board member and vice president of board certification. I worked at RSG for 37 years, and I'm a member of the ANSI ACP 111-1 Standards Committee, which is the Wind Turbine Sound Modeling Standards Committee. Principal investigator of the Massachusetts Clean Energy and Department of Environmental Protection Massachusetts study on wind turbine acoustics, which was sponsored to help them help the state of Massachusetts inform their wind turbine regulations. And I published 16 papers on wind turbine noise and 3 with Lawrence Berkeley National Labs. So what I want to talk to you today about is sort of the factors to consider in a noise regulation. And this is in part coming out of the Mass CEC study. And there are 4 factors that should be included in a noise regulation. Number 1 is the level and the weighting applied to that level. Number 2 is the sound level metric. So this is sort of the setting on the sound level meter. The sound level meter can have, will have different output depending on what metric you use to set the sound level. Then there's an averaging time. How long are you measuring over? And then there's a measurement location. So those are the 4 factors that are required in a good noise ordinance. In this proposed ordinance, there's a level, which is 50 dBA, but it lacks the metric averaging time. And then I just want to talk also about the issues I have to clarify the location of where it's measured. So there's a new standard out for wind turbine sound, and it's called ANSI ACP 111-1. And that just came out last year, and it recommends the LEQ metric. So the LEQ is what's called the continuous equivalent level, and it's an average sound level, but it instead of averaging the decibel levels, it averages the pressure behind the decibel levels. And so what that essentially means is it weights the higher sound levels over time. So, for example, the average of 60 decibels and 40 decibels is 57 decibels. So it weights those higher sound levels. So it's good for environmental regulation because it sort of acts like we perceive sound. We perceive and weight those higher sound levels over a period of time. So that's the LEQ metric. The standard also considers the L90 and L50 as good metrics. The L90 is a sound level exceeded 90% of the time, and the L50 is essentially a median sound level. And the reason the standard likes those is because it can filter out a lot of the stuff that's going on in the background that you don't want, like the dogs barking and cars going by, et cetera. And the standard strongly recommends against using Lmax metrics, which are instantaneous maximum sound levels. Going from one metric to another can have a substantial impact. And I'll use the example from the World Health Organization. They have two standards or two recommended guidelines for protecting against sleep disturbance. 45 decibels averaged over an 8-hour period, LEQ 8 hours, but 60 decibels LF max. So when you use the maximum sound level compared to the LEQ, you have a 15 decibel difference. So it's important that the metric you choose goes along with the level that you're recommending as well. And then the next part is the averaging time, how long you're averaging over. The ANSI ACP 111-1 recommends 10 minutes to 1 hour, so an LEQ over 10 minutes to 1 hour. 1 hour averaging time is the most accurate to predict and more consistent from measurement to measurement. Shorter averaging times are less easy to predict, have a higher variation. And the instantaneous maximum, like the Lmax, they can't be reliably predicted. They have a high variation between measurements, and they're unrelated to impacts. The last part is the location of the measurement. And a different ANSI standard, ANSI S 12.9 Part 3, which is a measurement standard, it recommends microphones be located 25 feet from a reflective surface, such as home. So the current, the proposed standard says at the facade, and if you measure at the facade, there's this phenomenon called pressure doubling. So if you move a microphone right against the facade, the sound levels jump by 6 decibels. So the ANSI standard recommends being 25 feet away to avoid these complicated reflections, impacts from reflections. And if you do measure right at the facade, you use a 6 decibel correction. So, in summary, we recommend the following change to the first section of the sound ordinance, the draft. So it would be that sound levels caused by the CWES measured at least 25 feet away from any occupied non-participating dwelling shall not exceed 50 decibels A-weighted, and then at LEQ 1 hour. And then we also recommend adding another sentence to the end saying any post-construction sound monitoring for comparison with these regulatory limits must be done in accordance with applicable national and/or international measurement standards. Measuring wind turbine sound levels is really hard because you have background, you have wind. Wind sounds very much the same as the wind turbines, and so it's one of those things that really should be done by a qualified professional following established standards. So that's what if you have that in the ordinance, just make sure that whoever's doing the measurement essentially knows what they're doing.
So what do you have to do if you obviously can't measure this till it's built and running? So what do you do when it's built and running and you're over 50 decibels? Do you have to build some sort of sound barrier for these folks? Is that kind of the intent of it, or?
Yeah, so what if your modeling is wrong? So before you do the project, you do a model and you predict try to predict what the sound levels are going to be based on the metrics, the averaging times and so forth. And let's say you have some upset condition where the sound level is higher. Is it because there's something wrong with the turbine that can be fixed? Is it because of icing on the turbine blades that needs to be addressed through shutdowns or our icing detection system? Is it something that occurs all the time without icing? In that case, there's such a thing called noise-reduced operations. And what you do is during whatever conditions are causing that exceedance, you reduce the rotational speed of blades, you change the pitch, and while you're losing energy, you're also reducing the sound. So you can reduce through called NROs or noise-reduced operations, you can reduce the sound by up to say 5 decibels.
So is there a regulatory body that is checking that, or are we supposed to be that? So I mean, here's the thing, like, you're right, and ANSI standards are, you know, their consensus standards, they're all good. But who's actually watching that to make sure that it's not exceeding 50 decibels? And is there an
Right.
actual requirement by any agency to do that?
And that's up to
You know.
you, whether you require that post-construction.
So
And
now
he does
my fear is that you are absolutely not equipped to do so. Or funded.
Right, so a lot of standards say that, that the developer would be, the developer's responsibility to hire an independent engineer to make those measurements.
Yeah. Is there
Throughout
a-
the year,
What's that?
So,
throughout the year.
is there a, like an average that they typically operate at, you know, say near 25 feet from a structure? I mean, what is the, I know there's a lot of variable there, but is there
Yeah,
a common
so-
number that is used in wind energy for decibels?
So typically, if you're talking about an LEQ, 10-minute, 1-hour LEQ, you know, the standards are typically between 45 and 50 decibels, and that's the maximum. So they typically operate less than that.
Yeah.
And over the course of the year, they'll probably, on average, operate about 5 dB less than whatever that maximum level that you set is.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, to give you perspective, like in general industry, you gotta be 86 decibels, you're required to wear hearing protection, you know, for prolonged periods of time. So I mean, you're still far away from that number, being at 50. I'm just curious, how are we ever gonna know? And are you staff to actually go check that? You know, and are we gonna pay a bunch of money to go hire a firm to go check these things on a regular basis? You know?
So I think that that's the part that it would allow, if somebody called in and they were complaining, a complaint came in saying, hey, the wind turbine out here is just it's really loud all the time. Then having something pertaining to this in the code section would allow us to either reach back out to the company and say, hey, we need you to come out and check these turbines in this area because we're getting complaints on the noise, and submit to us a report showing that yes, you are meeting it, or no, we're exceeding it, and now we're back down to where we should be. Or we could independently reach out, but we would independently reach out to
I mean, I guess,
a
is
professional.
the wind energy company be like, no, you measure it? I mean, how, can we
Well, I would
require them
think they
to?
would, but
So,
I'd rather them do it,
Yeah.
so we're not paying for it, but I'm just curious, can we make that as a requirement? That we can have them check?
I think Matt can speak to this too,
Yeah,
but
go ahead.
any jurisdiction as part of its police power authority to enforce its zoning ordinance can respond to and make any owner of any type of project respond to complaints that they're not meeting the requirements of the ordinance or the conditional use permit. So typically the way this works, and this isn't just wind and solar,
For sure.
is somebody complains, like Matt was saying, and his office reaches out to the owner of the facility and says, okay, prove to me that you're in compliance. And if they're not in compliance, then ultimately the final authority of the county would be to revoke that conditional use permit. These guys have a $500 million asset on the ground operating on the basis of that conditional use permit. That's not right. They're not gonna let that happen. And so they'll have to work with the county back and forth to make sure that that facility is in compliance. And I don't mean that as flip. You raise a good question.
No,
It's something that I think is sort of well established. I mean, you guys probably, unfortunately, from time to time, deal with exactly that with other types of facilities.
This does add a bigger bite to it by, it's there in a conditional use permit. And so those conditional use permits, we have brought them back before the board on reviews to say, we're not meeting the criteria set forth in the conditional use permit. And so it does add, it's a lot quicker way for remedies to happen by having it back before the Board of Adjustments. than it is to even go through like the citation process or notice of violation process. I mean, that could take, 6 months to a year of time, even longer in some cases to correct it in that way. But when on the conditional use permit, you can have a meeting within 30 days and say, we need to relook at these criteria.
Yeah, I'm guessing, given the areas you've mentioned that these are gonna go, I'm guessing it sounds not gonna be big of an issue, but.
Thanks.
Dave, could I ask you, so obviously I don't know anything about measuring sound, but the information that, is it Mike? I'm sorry, what was
Oh,
your name?
Ken, yeah.
I mean, does that make sense to you? I mean, it sounds like it's just a different way of measuring?
No, I think he raises some good points. I think we have and looking at this again, we did, as he said, it's 50 decibels on the A-weighted scale. The next piece of that I see most commonly is a 10-minute LEQ. And that should have been in there or something to that effect. He mentioned a 1 hour. I think we need to go back and look at that and add. I think those are good points.
I mean, if there's a
And I think
consensus
we need
standard, it
to-
makes sense to have that be what we use to
To
measure.
further flesh out 50 decibels at the A-weighted scale is part of it. As he said, we need to add the other parts. I agree. I don't know exactly which of the options he suggested. I think we want to look at that a little bit more. But yeah, I think those are good points.
Dave, in our existing ordinances, we've got a sound definition
Yeah.
that includes a lot of the measurements he's talking
Okay.
about.
Thank you.
That you probably didn't get with the draft.
That meant, yeah.
And they may not match up exactly, but they probably need to be updated just a little bit.
And that's a sound definition just in a separate.
It's in our
Full zoning ordinance.
Got it.
And then
Okay.
noise.
Ken, thank you.
Great point,
Appreciate
thank
it.
you.
I had a contract to administer a hearing test to Northern Natural Gas employees some years ago. So I'm somewhat familiar with hearing and hearing loss. And I was surprised at a hearing loss that I recognized right off the bat. Older employees of Northern Natural Gas had hearing loss in one ear, older employees, and not so much in the other ear. And I said, well, why is that? Well, they're farmers, and they have tractors that have no cabs. And when they're planting, they're always looking behind them, one ear towards the engine, the other ear back. And that's where their hearing loss, I mean, I'm talking several of them. That's where their hearing loss stems from. And what I've learned, that major hearing loss stems from not, sudden booms, but a continuous noise, continuous sound. Would I be right? Certainly.
I mean, OSHA says 86 decibels of continued sound, so, but yes, you're right, but it's
Yeah.
86 decibels.
So,
Yeah, that's not-
it's the continuous noise that actually causes a lot of hearing loss.
I would add to Commissioner Schultz or leaders, I can't remember who asked the question, or maybe it was down at the other end about, what is kind of the average, right? If you have a 50 decibel sound limit, and what I've seen when you see these modeling reports, and it's modeled at each receptor, right? Each, in this case, occupied non-participating residence. And there's a list, and of course, for every receptor, there's a modeled sound level, maximum sound level, using all these factors and other things. And none of them, of course, are above 50, or they wouldn't comply. But it's not that all of them are at 45 either. You'll have a couple that are at 45 or 46, then there's some at 44, 40. A lot of them are at 32, 28, right? Because they're just far enough away, essentially, or there's other attenuating factors. So it really is a maximum limit. It's not something where, at least in my experience, having seen a lot of these reports, these modeling reports, every turbine is right there, right? Especially with the taller turbines. I mean, the setback just kind of dictates that as well. And I think it's important to think about that 3 times setback and that 50 decibel level tend to go together pretty well. You can't say this far is this decibel level because there's so many factors. And I'm sure the expert could, expound on that quite a bit. But if they're too far off, one of them's going to drive it. If you have a 40 decibel sound limit and a 1,250 foot setback, that 40 decibel sound limit's that's the metric that matters. It can be the other way around too. And so one of the reasons in putting all this together based on experience that we recommended 3 times the height and the 50 decibels, not only are those kind of down the middle, pretty typical regulations, but they tend to work together pretty well. One of them's not so far one direction or the other that it kind of obviates the impact or the effect or the protective benefit of the other one.
Is there anybody else that want to come forward?
Okay, just a couple of little myths that I'm not for, I'm not against, I just want a good ordinance written and it's all said and done. Susan Miller, Pottawattamie County Supervisor, 521 Broadway, Carson, Iowa. And these are all with the wind ordinances. We use definition of occupied dwelling throughout. I don't have all the paragraphs when it's done, but Lynn, you're in the real estate business. I think we just need to say dwelling. I don't think we want to limit it to occupied dwelling, because you could have a house on the market and you may have a turbine that goes up, but that property is still for sale. We don't want to restrict selling the property, so I think we need to remove the word occupied.
Could be just defined a little different, maybe occupiable or, I don't.
Right.
You got some farmers that have a house that was grandma and grandpa's house that no one's ever gonna move into, but they don't wanna spend the money to tear it down.
What about,
So then this ordinance would,
what about
Habitable?
But maybe
habitable or?
or new build.
Well, and I don't know, what about livestock also? Is that,
That was
that
another-
might be a factor. I don't know.
Any dwelling or any building, I mean,
I'm cautious, just personally, I think dwelling is kind of, it's a very generic term.
It is.
So I think that it could.
But there again, it's a conditional use and everything has to be.
Yeah, I guess
you
that's
know.
fair.
So I mean, I guess part of that and, you know, would come into play during that. We can have you come forward, but we can't have you speak from there. Thank you, no worries. Go ahead, Susan.
So
Sorry, I
anyway,
didn't mean
it's
to.
just something to look at.
Yeah, we will.
Yeah.
Thank you.
The other thing is zoning for A2 and A3 for the conditional use for the wind turbines. And A3 is defined as riverfront and ag. And to me, riverfront brings migratory birds. And I'm like, why are we allowing wind turbines in those river right-of-ways or the migratory paths? So I didn't know if we wanted just to exclude and just work with the A2s or not. Just throwing that out there for consideration. I've already talked about the sound definition and bankruptcy. I'm not sure if the ordinances speak to if the owner of the turbines or the solar panels goes into bankruptcy, how that all handles out as far as ownership and who's responsible for removal of the.
Okay, we look at that.
How do you force somebody in bankruptcy to remove something?
Exactly.
Because
Well, and
They can't.
that gets complicated too, because they're gonna have lenders and investors and other people who are gonna step in and operate this facility, right? The kind of ironic thing, you've got this big, very expensive, multi-$100 million facility, and somebody's got a big 9-figure loan on that. The security for the loan isn't really the facility, it's the ability to sell the electricity that the facility generates.
Yep.
And so somebody's gonna step in real fast and keep operating that thing and keep selling that electricity most likely, but nonetheless, it's a good point.
But I mean,
We'll
are
look
they
at that.
bound to the same terms? I mean,
What's that?
Are they gonna be bound to the same terms if that person goes bankrupt or not?
Well, it's a conditional use, it's a conditional use permit.
Yes,
Yeah.
All
I
right,
think so.
that's all I have. Thank you.
Good questions, thank you.
So the board, the conditional, just so I'm clear, the conditional uses, ultimately the board will get to ask these questions again before it's granted?
Not on conditional use, no.
The Board of Adjustment.
Got it, okay.
The Board of Adjustment will make those, and then if anything that gets appealed from the Board of Adjustment goes directly to district court.
Yeah, because I mean, I feel like your dwelling comments, absolutely, I mean, it could just be so different on some of these pieces of property that technically it's
Can
a
I come up
habitable
here?
dwelling or maybe not. Come on up.
You bet.
I'm Julie Drennan. I live in St. Paul, Minnesota, 1043 Como Place. I'm also with RWE. I just want to clarify that for the occupied versus not, usually when we model it, it's just residential. Like when we look, it's not like we have someone out there being like, oh, is anyone in there? So, for what it's worth, you can clarify or not, but it's, it's not like we're that granular. So it's just a dwelling where it could inhabit, it could have people. So that's one. As far as birds go, just generally, we are beholden to really strict federal, state standards for making sure that we are aware of habitats of concern and species of concern. So we are regulated in that regard, and we do submit plans showing that we've identified bird migratory paths and nesting habitats and all that as well.
So DNR grant you a permit or EPA or who's?
DNR does, yeah. DNR does, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, we work with them too, Army Corps. So there's a lot of protections for those. So I understand the comment, but just wanted you to be aware of the regulatory bodies.
Thank you. Thank you.
Those are my two.
Appreciate that.
I got a question. So let's say somebody wants to build a house.
So if the turbine's already up, it's a reciprocal, it's a reciprocal setback. So they have to build it within a certain distance of that.
Right.
If it's on signed land, then it's a different situation. It might be a different setback if they waive that setback distance, but I'm not sure how the county.
So the county's gonna have to know, since there's a windmill, X amount of feet, I wanna build, on this, and then you're gonna have a measurement for that wind turbine, right?
So the question that you're posing is like one of the first questions that I posed back to David and his staff on there. Because in zoning, I always try to think of inadvertently taking use from people's ground, right? So, when I asked that question, should we consider a property line instead of a non-participating parcel in order to not create a taking? Could a building be constructed in the shadow of the turbine afterwards on there? And then the response back from Lee was the property line setbacks are an option, but they often result in insufficient land use because the property lines can be a mile long and far away from any dwelling. Setbacks therefrom often protect nothing but the bare ground. As long as the setbacks are not reciprocal, which we do not provide here, an adjacent property owner may build in the shadow of a turbine at their discretion. They would do so with full knowledge of an existing land use. This provision contemplates a setback of no less than the total height of both participating and non-participating property lines with the additional protection from the non-participating dwellings. We attempt to further clarify the same. We also build in an extra 1/10 to reassure landowners and officials that the tower could not physically intrude over any property line or roadway, even in the unlikely event of a failure. So I think they.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Anybody else? Come on up.
Julie hit on what I was speaking on.
I'll keep it short.
So Will Doherty, Mid-American Energy, 4299 Northwest Urbandale Drive, Urbandale, Iowa. So obviously we have the Walnut Wind Farm already operating in Pottawattamie County. That's part of the reason why we're here tonight. We just see ourselves, in a position operating 37 wind farms across the state of Iowa. We just procured our 38th wind farm as well, and that's under construction. We just feel that we have a lot of experience in this field, trying to provide ourselves as a resource for the county as you kind of go through this process. We're not new to it. We're involved in a lot of these processes across the state. Seems like they've been coming up more and more recently. So we've provided comments in the draft ordinance right now, mostly just kind of looking for clerical revisions, things such as like how are the setback distances measured, some of the decommissioning stuff as well, some of the repowering stuff as well. So feel free to ask any questions on any of those comments that we've issued. If you're looking for input kind of from the industry and on the operations side of it and how it might impact Mid-American as a partner with the community. let us know, and we'd be more than happy to work with our operations team, our management team, and everything like that to address your comments, concerns, questions, or anything like that along the lines. So just want to provide ourselves as a resource for the county since we're already kind of a community partner with the Walnut Wind Farm.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Good. Could be questions or comments from the board? And the staff's recommendation?
So I would say from the input that we got Mid-American's comments this morning, they came in, and then I think the input that RWE gave us, and then the things from the Board of Supervisors that we have here tonight, we have some good points to go back and make some revisions upon what we have here. And so I think for tonight, I don't know that I would ask the commission to take any action on it other than to
Can we table it?
table it for a month. And then that way we can come back, make some revisions. We'll get the information back out to you all again, because obviously it's a lot of information to be able to review. You can review those sections. We'll make notes and highlight the ones that we made modifications to on there for you. And then meet again over it next month.
Matt, could you forward Mid-America's comments to the board? We didn't receive them.
I will, yes.
Thank you.
I'll make a motion to close public hearing.
Second it.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the same. Motion carried.
And then,
I just have a quick question. So like, I mean, we talked about noise. Is there anything in here that has to do with, like vibration? Like, is that part of the sound, or? I mean, I've heard
In our
people
sound,
talk about that before, you know.
so our sound,
way in the
the
past.
sound ordinance in the zoning piece of it has been one of the hardest ones to enforce the entire time, with the 20 years that I've been with the county. And we've dealt with it on motocross tracks.
Yep.
The biggest one we dealt with it on, and to your point of the vibration, is the quarry. So for a number of years, the quarry has operated moving in one direction. They made a shift in their direction, so when they blast, and they blast on certain days where the humidity's at a certain level of the cap, then it does more, there's more ground vibration with it, there's more sound that travels with it. And so I did work extensively with the group that monitors the sound levels out there and the equipment that they use to do it. But it is addressed in there, in our sound ordinance, about vibrations and what that causes in there. It is a tough one to.
So we already have something in our code that deals with vibration.
Noise.
Noise.
Noise and vibration.
Noise and vibration. Okay.
But I do
That's
think,
fine, I just was curious.
I don't know that you can argue too much with the credibility of what Ken brought to the table here
I
and
think that's good.
his background in there. And so I think there was definitely some really good points made to, even with the sound section that we already have in the ordinance, to further clarify it within one section is, and has been done before. Say this is exactly where we want you to do and what measurements to take, on what scale, for what time period. I mean, it's no different than any measurement or pressure test things that we do for the building ordinance.
Sounds good, I'll make a motion to,
Table
table case number ZTA 2023-03 until our next meeting, which, when would that be?
no, I don't know. I don't know
So we
about
have a
that.
date for it, 16? We need a rain man here,
Yeah, 16th of October.
October 15th, okay, so.
16. 1-6.
6, okay. So that's my motion.
Second it. Discussion.
Any discussion?
Well, yeah, I mean, I just have a comment, I guess I'll do it because it's discussion, but, we gotta be, I'm always cautious to over-regulate, so we always wanna make sure that there's standards, there's things that rules that we should be abiding by, but at the same time, we also don't wanna be under-regulating either, so this is gonna be a very careful balance, and, I think about pipeline, the chicken ordinances, I mean, all the ordinances we've had since I've been around the board. It's like, I don't want this one to be another bane of my existence, so I just wanna make sure we do this right, and I think, I appreciate you bringing up the decibel thing, cause I think that's an easy win for us on this one, so.
Well, no, I know you've heard me say it before, Pottawattamie County has historically been a county of minimums when it comes to the ordinance. It's
Yeah.
usually whatever the state has adopted, we don't try to add on to it, we've adopted it as the state adopted. This is just one area where the state of Iowa has nothing out there, so it
Yeah.
is different all across
Yep.
numerous counties.
Well, this should limit our liability too, I mean, that's another key piece to this, I think. We don't need a bunch of lawsuits, if we can do it right, we're good. Anyway.
I agree with what Justin said, and also Jeff Jorgensen's comment about, I mean, I'm not a big fan of them personally, and they're gonna end up being right in my backyard, but at the same time, I think this is a good, so far, when we revise it, come back next month, I think it's, I think it'll be good. I don't think we can absolutely restrict them, but I think it's a good balance, so.
Alright, so it's been moved and seconded. Roll call.
To postpone until next month.
Schultz?
Aye.
Larson?
Yes.
Leaders?
Yes.
Chapman?
Yes.
Any other business? Matt?
No other business for tonight. I'm just, thanks to the commission, thanks to the board of supervisor members for coming out for this joint meeting. I really appreciate it.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Sorry, roll call.
Aye.
Aye.
Quick up here.
Aye. Okay, adjourn.
There you go.
So I'm free to speak right from over here.
Wait